My name is Chad, and today, as you can see, I'm riding solo. Greg is on vacation, and I decided that it's probably just gonna be a good idea, good fun night to kind of connect with Chad, involve you guys in the show, all that sort of fun stuff. Tonight we are talking about what do normal people actually look for when they're buying a new car, and why are we discussing that? Well, next week we have none other than Tony of True Game Data fame from anyone who plays Call of Duty or some of the first-person shooters that he's actually dug into the actual code and data of the game to help you out with loadouts, time to kills, all that other sort of fun stuff that sort of revolutionized gaming. So we're going to have him on the show next week. But one of the things is we're working on a project to potentially use that same sort of thought process, that same sort of data-driven sort of plug in your wants, your needs, your etc. Into an app or a website or a program or what have you, and have it spit out recommendations and things of that nature to sort of pass along the knowledge that we have, that all of you in chat have, and everything, the genuine car guys, that we can pass along some information without actually overwhelming. We've all probably had a friend come to us and say, hey, what do you think I should buy as far as a car? What do you think of these cars? What do you think of that? What do you think is good for me? Here's kind of what I'm looking for. Et cetera, et cetera. And this kind of the plan is to put it into, say, what do you want to call it? A one-stop shop, a spot to, make it easy and recognizable and things of that nature. While we're kind of waiting, Doug, Steve, what's going on, my dudes? I mean, not for nothing, it could be possible to figure out an app that uses the dash cam, tell me stock horsepower and torque of the car in front of me. Although with your knowledge in multiple different types of vehicles that you have owned over the course of your life, I'm shocked you don't know that most of the time. Steve goes, manufacturers need to bring the vent under the steering wheel back. I would settle for a vent that didn't either blast you directly in your face, because like the car I'm currently driving, I forget the year, Equinox, it's either on you and in my face, and it dries my eyes out. So like during like allergy season or when my sinuses are going, it's a bit of a pain. But I put this to our Shift Squad supporter group over on Facebook as their homework assignment for the evening. And that is, we are car guys, and I'll get into that in a second. But what would normal individuals value in a car? I'll go right off the bat. So like, for example, we are undoubtedly car dudes. We have thoughts, we have ideas. For me personally, when I'm looking for a car, it's really what I'm using the car for. This whole notion of sporty crossovers can get stuffed. The idea of something that can do everything, yes. Your sports sedans, your wagons, or if you're more of the off-road persuasion, your TRD stuff, your Raptors, your Broncos, your Wranglers, so on and so forth. But as far as what I'm concerned is I want a car with a good reputation, a car that has an exciting, interesting engine. No offense if you drive a turbocharged 4-cylinder, but they're everywhere. And it's really hard to make those things sound particularly good. So usually it's some form of, all my cars have been, apart from my first cars, have been straight six, let's see here. We have straight six, I5 or straight 5-cylinder, V8, V8. So like, um, and then I want the car to do something, right? Like the average person would, I want the car to go do the, um, the school runs, the grocery shopping, the road trips to go see grandma and grandpa or whatever, to be comfortable, to have a decent enough stereo, to have enough creature comforts, but also, enough tech, like all that other sort of stuff. Me personally, I like all of that stuff, but I also want a car that's interesting, fun to drive, makes a decent amount of power, and for me, a pretty solid aftermarket because I cannot leave well enough alone and I modify my cars. I think that for me, that's at the core of car enthusiasm is making a car yours, is to making it different than say the person who just cut a check and got the car. It was really awesome to say that when I had the Mustang that I was making more horsepower than a GT 500, but it was in a GT with a manual, with a built manual, and it was just a well thought out build and things of that nature. Obviously the car has to look good. If it doesn't look good, what's the point? You could design the best car with the best engine, makes the great noise. The shifter is perfect. The suspension is perfect. The way it handles is predictable and gives you that sense that you are a way better driver than you actually are. That car that speaks to you, so you have a car that is communicating when the tires might be you could have all of that stuff, and it could look pig ugly. Hard pass. It's so, but when it comes to normal people, they don't really care if the car, in fact, if the car makes noise from the engine, they usually don't like it. They like it to be a little on the quieter side or as quiet as possible. They want to be separated from the mechanical bits. The what you call it? So that's why like I'm kind of putting it to you guys, and we have some individuals here. Doug works at a dealership, so he deals with the general public. I would like have some sort of metric between 5, 7 of the top things that you could sort of subcategorize if you wanted to. But I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. We have a decent amount of people here. Let's see here, Doug. I mean, I have a general idea, and driving a 14-year-old Volvo means there's no embarrassment, but sometimes it would be fun to know what the odds are. Oh, speaking of your app with horsepower and torque and all that sort of stuff. I mean, yeah. Probably isn't too difficult given the nature of, how AI could pretty much figure out. It would just be knowing the model, right? Like you could be behind. Most cars these days have the engine displacement, or it's in the model name, what engine's in it. So that would give you an idea of the advertised horsepower and torque figures. So, let's see here. Sean's here. What's going on, my dude? Doug goes, generally any car I like at Volvo means it'll sell horribly. I can tell you what's popular based on what I like the least. My list is way too short. That's kind of what I'm getting at is the fact that what we like makes up maybe 1% of automotive sales in the country. Maybe. We're a different breed. We have different priorities. We have, yeah, sure, average people out there don't want to blend in, but then again, they're willing to sit here and drive a fairly ugly front-ended BMW because it has a BMW badge. That's all that matters. The BMW is, that's it. That's a byproduct for quality and luxury, and they made it and all the other sort of nonsensical stuff. Sean goes, his list of things would be reasonable reliability, and affordability, and that includes cost of ownership. I think that's massive for a lot of us. There we go. It falls into a sort of value for money, right? If you have a car that costs a certain amount, but doesn't really match up with what else is being offered at the same price, or seems expensive for what the car ultimately is, or I call this the Nissan phenomena, because a lot of the Nissan Infinities are ridiculous. Like we'll use the we'll use the new Z as an example, right? Now it's a cool car, has that nice retro styling to it. I thought the big square grille would grow on me. It's not, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it's a pretty decent, fun little car. It makes enough horsepower for that kind of segment. 400's nothing to sneeze at. Your downpipes in a tune away from knocking on the door of 500. It's a cool car, but there's no denying that the chassis is 20 years old. The base engine is fine because it's, aluminum block, aluminum heads, which is, i.e. the modern engine. But it's not pushing any real great boundaries of technology. It's that the car is old, and yet a Nismo Nissan Z, brand new, will set you back damn near $80,000. Say what you will about the Supra and it being a BMW and Toyota clothing and etc. At least there's the perception of, well, it's got BMW guts, Sony guts. It's got BMW guts, right? And BMWs cost a pretty penny. They're a little bit more on the expensive side. They're a little more premium. So even though you're buying a Toyota, you kind of get the feeling that you're getting a little more than your average Toyota, so to speak. So, and even then, that's a little pricey for what is effectively a, two-door sports car. But, the engine has proven to be massive, and everything like that. It's, but that value for money, that what I'm getting makes sense. I'm going to give you a lot of money, and in turn I'm going to get I'm going to get my money's worth, sort of a deal. Hold on. Doug goes, so again, just a reminder, Doug is actually a salesman for Volvo. So if you ever need a Volvo or looking for a new one, Doug's the man to hit up. He goes, top questions I get are wireless CarPlay, start, stop, disable. So, i.e. a technological feature these cars have that people want to turn off. Is start, stop, disable, third row legroom in cars that are small, sunroof, in his words, in parentheses, why? And does my dog fit in the trunk? Ladies and gentlemen, Volvo buyers. But I know, I think that comes down to, comfort. and something like, you know, tech, because I will freely admit the Mustang, the black one, the one with the, wounded engine, has wired CarPlay, but not wireless CarPlay. So I actually went out and bought an adapter to make it wireless CarPlay, because I think that is one of the most underrated features from a day-to-day aspect that you could have if you have a car and an iPhone. It's super nice to be able to go and have my phone, and where I listen to, my podcast, I have my navigation all on there, all that sort of stuff, my music, whatever. And it's nice to know that it's just, I sit down, it takes a minute to boot up, and then I'm good to go. And I have it all right there. I don't have to worry about it. I can make phone calls from it. I can do whatever without actually having to, mess with my phone. Apart from, random messages and things of that nature. Sean goes, also parts availability as well. Obviously, yes. But one would assume new car parts available for at least the next 10 years. Used car, obviously, little bit of a bigger question. Most of, if not all of us, the current cars we drive are pre-owned. It's why a lot of us aren't particularly running to go buy a Saab, although some of you probably love that idea. I think, parts cost. I'll give you an example of that. When I had my IS300, with the 2J, the 2JZGE, the NA motor, obviously, and it had the W55 transmission, which is the weakest of the Toyota manual transmissions of that time frame. So one would assume the least expensive. I went to Lexus to have them do the clutch and flywheel. They quoted me a price. I went next door to the Toyota dealership and asked them what it would cost to do the same job on an NA Supra. And it was like 40% cheaper. Yes, I understand that the Supra's got the W58 transmission, a little bit stronger, same basic design, same basic job, right? So I went to the Toyota. I go, hey, could you do the same job on my Lexus? And they said yes. So, and then when like I said, when I had like the BMW, parts were insanely expensive. That luxury car tax is real. And using the new Supra as an example again, we have, the BMW parts might be a byproduct. Again, I'm not saying this is how I feel. I'm saying general perception among the average person who isn't necessarily a car enthusiast like we are. That that perception of quality, because it's BMW, also comes with higher maintenance costs because BMW. Even though the B58 is a pretty freaking insane engine. Doug goes, I do chuckle when people ask about parts availability when buying an old model when they keep the car only a few years. That's the other part of that, like, parts availability conversation. It's like, when that becomes a concern, like, when that's a concern, most people, you're not an average, I don't want to make a general statement here, but like, that's outside the average consumer, right? They're buying that old car for a reason, and generally speaking, that reason is either there's a twinge of enthusiasm to it. There's a twinge of, Obviously, some older cars are cheaper, and that's part of it as well. Andrew, what's going on, my man? Yeah, that rides video where they do the IS 430 is an epic one. You know, you got Chip Foose designing it, you got the Millens doing the actual build itself. The fact that it was funded by Toyota, they took it to the auto shows. I distinctly remember seeing that car at the New York Auto Show when I was a kid. Well, not a kid because I was either in high school or just in college when that came out. I forget the exact year of that video. But again, it kind of shows that they were like, all right, well, we have this 3 Series competitor that's doing fantastically. We don't really need to do an M competitor, which annoyed me. But the IS300 is one of the best small luxury sedans from that era, so Honda announced they're jumping on the bandwagon to manufacture new old parts for the enthusiast. I mean, it's just a market, and I mean, not for nothing. And if an aftermarket company or is gonna make the money on those parts, why not get involved in it? You know, if someone else, like the OEMs like money, and if someone else is gonna make money, like, well, we can do that. We designed this stuff, so that's. But a lot of time with that sort of stuff is it's enthusiast driven. You know, they're not gonna be making a ton of parts for like, you know, 23-year-old Honda Fits. I mean, they might, but I don't really see much profitability in doing that. Yeah, Andrew, the old Toyotas and stuff are really, really, you know, basically anything Japanese from the late 90s and early, or that was designed and engineered in the late 90s, early 2000s, not even, in like the early 90s all the way up through the mid 2000s back, because Japan, there was an economic boom and it was really good for, I think this might be one of the dumber things I say on stream, really good for the yen. Yen is Japanese currency. I don't know why that's escaping me at the moment, but here we are. So they were flushed with cash, so they over-engineered the crap out of pretty much everything they did, with the exception of their manual transmissions, apart from the I'm gonna forget the R154 and the Getrag that came in the Mark IV Supra, the twin turbo Supra. The W55 and W58 are, I don't understand why they went through the exercise of it. There were 5-speed transmissions. They already had the 154, which was a great, strong little transmission. It is what it is. We're getting sidetracked here. Sean goes, Hyundai enters the chat on parts availability. That's probably because all the old Hyundais have broken down and they could just reclaim them. That is actually probably an interesting thought exercise to go back and look at like Hyundai and like, when did they cross over from being utter and complete shit into good cars, into some of the best cars. I know it's probably right around when they start, because I know, if memory serves, and again, I'm doing this straight from memory, they started offering the 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty. But the quality of the car didn't necessarily improve until just after that. I could be wrong. They could have coincided. At least in my head, it would make the most sense to have them coincide. It's like, look, we've actually engineered a good thing. Here's a warranty to prove it. It's because you poor. Andrew goes, I watched the Motor Week of 2001 Lexus IS300. I love them. They're sweet beauty to have. Yeah, the sport crosses are rare. They were fucking ridiculously rare to begin with. Um, that reminds me, um, there was a someone did a manual swap on one and was selling it. Let me just see here if it's in my saved stuff. Not, no, definitely not that far back. Coyote short block, Coyote short block, Coyote supercharger, Coyote short block. I forget about that. Um, the IS300s in general are just well designed, well engineered cars. It's again, it's a shame they didn't come from. They didn't make a fact because you got to remember back in the like 2001, 2, 3, 4. I think they went to all the way till 2006 with the first gen IS300s. In that time frame, all they had to do was beat the M3, which had the S54, which was okay. A lot of people love that engine. 330 some odd horsepower out of 3.2 liters, naturally aspirated, individual throttle bodies, variable valve control, the lot. That was really heady stuff for the early 2000s. That was race car shit. Also wasn't really reliable past a certain mileage, as you all know I went through. But they had that, even if they, so the 3UZ, the 4.3 is the worst UZ to get because to make the displacement, the cylinder walls are really thin. So they're good for maybe 400 horsepower, maybe. But that, you're pushing it beyond that because the cylinder walls are so thin. But if all your competition is making is 330 horsepower out of a straight six, then it revs past 8,000 RPM, so it's not the torquiest thing in the world. Well, the 3UZ would make 360, 380 without really breaking a sweat. So, you could have had the chassis was great in the IS300. You could have easily had an M3 killer back then. Why they didn't do it? I guess the idea didn't hit them until too late in the model run, and the facelifted one was coming, and then that's when F was planned with the 2UR. So, kind of go from that. Doug goes, I'm just depressed to learn that the Fit came out in 2001. That's what I'm saying. I do not think there are many that's a 20-year-old car. That I don't think they're going to be rushing to make, or they're going to be flooded with, orders. Oh no, we're getting a ton of orders for 2001 Honda Fit control arms. I don't really think there's going to be enough of a market there to justify reopening the manufacturing plants for Fit parts. Hyundai has supply chain issues still post-pandemic is what I meant. Yeah, I mean, they have no problem getting all three brands over here, though. I mean, it's... At any rate. Vic is in the chat, and Vic, I was actually... This is actually a video. Hey, Steve, thanks for hanging out, man. Get some rest. Drink water, man. Drink tons of water. But have a good one, my dude. Uh, but yeah, so Vic asks in chat, what do you think of Ford's comment on car shoppers? Uh, on car shoppers care who makes the engine. I think the actual comment was is that car buyers don't care about powertrain. Is the exact quote. Um, and now for all of us, our first gut reaction, my first gut reaction is like, or he said the powertrain doesn't matter as long as it meets certain performance benchmarks. Um, so, and I think my first reaction after seeing was that like the fuck it doesn't, like the engine is the soul of the car. It's what makes or breaks the car, right? Like how many great cars are ruined by a great engine that is meh. Look at, I would argue, apart from the V12s, the entirety of Ferrari's lineup at the moment. Like, turbocharged V6s, that doesn't scream Italian exotic to anyone. What is another good example? Like, your Mustang, your six-cylinder Mustangs, Camaros, Challengers, Trans Ams when they were around. I don't know if they made it. They had to have. I don't know if they made a six-cylinder Trans Am. I mean, they might have. I have no idea. And here's the thing: like the six-cylinder Camaro engines, I forget what their Achilles heel is, but other than that, I shouldn't say Achilles heel, but like the thing you'd want to address, like the oil pump gear in Coyotes, if you're looking to add power. But those little 3.5s are really good candidates for boost. They can make a pretty decent amount of horsepower. They're one of those engines that some people have started playing with, but not enough have played with them to make them mainstream and, well, expensive. So that's, but at any rate, great car, or I'll even go one further, modern cars. You look at the modern Raptor, you look at the modern Raptor Bronco, the last generation of Raptor, they're all EcoBoosts. That, I don't know, I think with the equal length exhaust, EcoBoosts sound okay, but it's a disconnect. The high-pitched noise of that engine juxtaposed to a big pickup truck, a big SUV, something with off-roading capability. I mean, it's never really seemed to matter for Toyota, but for my money, the Raptor is at its peak when it has a V8. And that's like one of the first builds I would do if I hit the lottery would be to V8 swap a Bronco Raptor. So like from an enthusiast standpoint, the engine is everything. Or the powertrain. And a meh chassis, but look at Hellcats, for example, right? Charger is a great sedan, albeit on an ancient chassis. That's good in corners. Better than a lot of people think. But 4,200 pounds of, Newtonian physics is a lot to make up. So they're really good in a straight line or driving around. But it doesn't matter because the Hellcat engine is just such a thing. The whine of the supercharger, the power it produces, the roar of a V8 engine, all of that sort of stuff. So the car may not be able to hang in the corners with its competition, your Charger, Challenger, or whatever. But that's completely offset by the straight line performance and the ability for the car to put a smile on your face just by hitting the gas. And then, Jeep Grand Cherokee, meh, they're good, they're decent, they have their subset of people who like them. Trackhawk, they put a Hellcat in a Jeep? Like, not even a Wrangler, but like a Grand Cherokee, the soccer mom mobile? Like, suddenly makes the Grand Cherokee interesting. So, like, the engine can make or break a car, regardless of if it's a great car or those Challenger Chargers with the regular Hemi, yeah, they're cool, but the Hellcat makes them legendary. You know, but same kind of thing with this whole notion of what do like normal people actually give a shit about when it comes to what they look for in purchasing a car would be, does the powertrain really matter? Now, like we said before, most average people, if you ask them, you know, what do you prefer an engine to sound like? And they're going to sit here and tell you that it's working and that it's not too loud. That's basically it. You know, so at that level, does the powertrain matter as long as it meets certain metrics, certain levels of, I don't want to say performance, but it's how we would describe it. And what I mean by that is, yeah, you could make an engine that is crazy economical on the highway when you're rolling and you don't really have a ton of inertia to overcome. But you drive it around town, you drive it where a lot of people end up driving their car a lot is obviously around their house, stop and go traffic, all this other stuff. And that tiny little engine that's really economical when the car is rolling isn't so great at moving 1.5 tons, 2 tons around. So it's burning a ton more fuel. So it's not as economical. It's less efficient. You know, people are going to care about the powertrain there, especially if, you know, people don't want to drive. Most people don't care how the 0-60 times. They don't care about top speeds. They don't. But what they do care about is they're pulling out of an intersection or they're pulling out of a parking lot onto the main road. That's like, say, a 45. They want to be able to get up and go. They don't need to go as fast as us lunatics. But they want to be able to move. They don't want to feel like they're just lingering in there, potentially having something hit them or whatever. You know, so you could achieve that with a ton of different powertrains, hybrid powertrains, electric powertrains, big V8. And I think that consumer is going to care more about it being economical on gas, reliable, and have just enough snot to get them out of a parking lot, a side road. You get the idea. So, but I also think on the grander scheme, powertrains absolutely matter because it basically dictates the direction of which your company goes. Example of this. The average person doesn't really care about the Hemi. They don't. It's like, oh, that's a cool name. I remember something about it in this, you know, it used to be big in the 60s. It's been in trucks and muscle cars, blah, 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 blah. But they didn't care like we cared when the Hemi went away. However, that new straight six, which if you look at performance metrics, was objectively better. Now, it's not, but it wasn't as reliable. It was more complicated. It's more expensive to maintain. A dual overhead cam, straight six engine with 2 turbochargers, all of the cooling, all of that goes involved with that. It's a much more complex engine, so it's going to have more points of failure. Not that it's a big deal with a lot of other manufacturers, but apparently it was a big deal for Chrysler and Stellantis. And cost of maintenance go up, and that's a huge deal. Like, it might not mean much on like your sedan when you kind of like, okay, it's a performance sedan, I get it, blah 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 blah. It means a lot to those guys who are in the quarter ton, the half ton pickup trucks who are going from a pushrod V8. It's relatively simple, relatively easy to understand. Not a ton, no, doesn't have turbos, doesn't have variable valve. Well, doesn't have 2 cams with variable valve timing in it. Doesn't need a complex ECU. Doesn't need a shit ton of wiring and everything like that. That matters. And they're not enthusiasts. It just matters from an overall truck experience. Even though, again, the EcoBoost with Ford the Hurricane with Mopar. Performance-wise, they can generate more torque lower because of the way they tune the turbos. They can tow more. They're better on gas. Like a lot of stuff in the day-to-day that are actually better. But in the Hurricane's case, people were pissed, especially in the trucks, like I mentioned. And it turns out to not be very reliable. So, while it may not have mattered to people that the Hemi was going away and this new modern engine was coming in its place, the fact that the new modern engine wasn't vetted or whatever, quality control was down, whatever led to its issues, was a master blow to not just the cars and trucks that engine came in, but to the brand as a whole. And that is huge damage. So now, the first modern engine they have the Pentastar V6 or whatever, which is modern-ish, or whatever. So now when Mopar, Chrysler, Dodge, Ram, etc. come out with a new engine, nobody trusts it. The Ram went from being number 2 in truck sales back down below GM. So that powertrain there absolutely 100% matters, regardless of your enthusiast level. Ford experienced something similar, but they had at least the foresight and the they had a better idea of who their customer was, because when they introduced the EcoBoost engines, they still offered the V8. It was still an option. So people, having that option is massive. And a lot of people went with the V8s because that's what they know. I mean, granted, the Coyote is a much more complicated engine than, say, a Hemi or Gen 3 Hemi, which is, Christ, it's the oldest of the big three's current V8 lineup. Let's see here. Doug goes, I used to sell Fords, ended back in 2017. Actually, on the PS, they're pushing hard that Ford was the only domestic making their own diesel trucks. Their own diesel. You mean their own... Oh, you mean the engine. You mean the Power Stroke, right? Whereas Ram famously went with Cummins, and General Motors went with Duramax, if I'm understanding you correctly. Power Stroke, boy, there's a whole history with the Power Stroke. And Sean goes, too bad they never Hellcated a Ram van. I mean, the Ram vans make it, cool in concept, terrible consumer idea. They would have had more success Hellcatting a Pacifica, which I still think is something they should have done. That would have brought them a ton of hilarious press. You could have put a Pacifica body on a Trackhawk. I'm not saying that's easy, but it's fairly easy if you're an OEM, even Mopar. Vic asks, on the contrary, what do you think of the name ZR1X? We kind of touched on this with Keith last week. So I'll kind of give you the short version of that. I hate it. I personally, I don't get, the X means nothing. It was just a letter they chose. This according to an article in Road and Track. And it's lazy. Everything else is alphanumeric. However, when you get into the hypercar space, names start to, hell, even Ferrari's going back to alphanumeric. The short version is, I don't like it because everybody's been calling this thing the Zora since we first learned it was going to be a thing. And I honestly thought that was a great way to top the Corvette lineup. not the biggest fan of the C8s, but I get why a mid-engine Corvette is a thing. It's been they've wanted it to be a thing since the car was pretty much introduced. And Zorro had a huge part of that. Zorro's vision was always to make a mid-engine Corvette. And now you have this 1,250 horsepower monster of a Corvette that is going to really challenge some of the hypercar elite. It's a little on the heavy side to seriously challenge a lot of them. And you just call it the X. That is so lazy. They could have named it after Zorro. They could have paid homage to the man who basically made the Corvette what it was. The man who always had the vision of the ultimate mid-engine performance Corvette. You could have... There were so many good things about it that they just... Like, I mentioned this last week. You have the ZR1. What if you called it the ZRA? Now you're just a letter away from Zora, and it's Zora if you just pronounce it phonetically, is whatever that word is. So I don't know. I think it was a missed. Like I said, I think it was a missed opportunity. And who knows? It's still pre-production, so they could. Fooled you. X was a placeholder. We tweaked the hybrid. It makes 3 more horsepower now, and now we're calling it the Zora. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's possible. Doug on the Ford diesels. The early Power Strokes were IH. I don't know what IH means, if I'm being honest. And Doug continues, and I have a red farm, so I like them up through the 7.3. But for modern trucks, Ford's is the only one that makes their own motor, chassis, and transmission. Ford used to tout that for them. So for them to say it doesn't matter seems silly. Oh, right. So powertrains don't matter. Yeah, I mean, I think you grasp at whatever marketing tool you have. Right? So, you know, the Cummins is a legendary diesel engine, so Ram's going to gravitate towards that sort of marketing. Chevy just has the Duramax, and I don't know the first thing about Duramaxes, if I'm being brutally honest. Ford in the Power Stroke. Ford was very keen, like you said. We developed everything in the F-150 Super Duties, including the engine, chassis, blah, 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 all the way down the list. And then Power Stroke started sucking. So was that... You know, I get what you're saying, how like they tout this. I mean... But I think it's more of a... We're just going to grasp at whatever marketing thing we can do that people seem to like. Which back in the day was basically how you sold cars. Yeah, back to the Ferrari, like they call it the SF90XX. LOL. Yeah, and I mean, even in the nomenclature of Ferrari, their model numbers used to mean something. You know, I forget when they went away from it and then subsequently came back to it, but it used to be the Ferrari model number was nothing more than an individual cylinder's displacement in an individual cylinder's displacement with so like a 250 was a V12 and each cylinder displaced 250 cc if memory serves. I think that's the unit of measurement they used. So like it kind of had meaning to it. Now it just... I mean, that comes back to sort of the Corvette thing is they named their top of the range car at one point the Enzo. Seems like Chevy naming something the Zora is not only cool thing to do. It's also stuff like it's been done. It's sort of a nice way to honor someone who's been a massive part of your company or the model or etc. Doug goes, IH stands for International Harvester. The Red Farm are International Harvester Farms. Man, I don't speak agricultural. What is a red farm? I thought you were just referring to like a red farmhouse. Doug continues, Ford used Cummins in their F650, F7 650, I think up through 2015-ish. I mean, when it comes to diesels in America on a quote-unquote consumer level, i.e. something you can walk into a dealer and buy, Cummins has sort of the, what's the word? The panache. You know, the reputation, the, you know, internet clout, for whatever the hell that's worth. The fact that there's people building these 12 and 24 valves, you know, people building their new common rails, like all this stuff. Like, Cummins has that brand awareness in a positive light, whereas I think Powerstroke has brand awareness in the general public. I'm not talking about insiders. But on the general public, Powerstroke has sort of a negative. And Duramax is just... You could make an argument that Duramax is the Camaro of the big three trucks diesel engines. And what I mean by that is, like, on the one hand, you have the Cummins. No, because, like, both the LS and the Coyote were basically the Cummins, and the Camaro was sort of the forgotten engine, or the forgotten one in between, like, your Hellcats and Challengers, etc., and your what Ford did with the S550 and beyond. Just, I should have thought that one out before I actually iterated it. But perks of doing this stuff live. Andrew goes, I always love the Dodge Cummins engines. Those engines are sweet and nice, even in every gen. I mean, they're just workhorses, man. They work. I don't know a lot about them, but I know that if you have a Brazilian block, i.e. a Cummins like 5.9, where the block was manufactured in Brazil, you're asking for trouble. That's because I watched a guy build a Cummins. I think he built it was a 12-valve complete engine, but he put a 24-valve head on it with a built P pump. And he was going over like the block numbers and stuff, and what stood out was this: if it has this number, which escapes me, I'm sure you can Google it, means it's from Brazil, and they're no good. So, for all of you out there who are thinking about getting a Cummins for a swap or something, might wanna do some Googling on that. Nissan isn't used Cummins in their Nissan Titans. Yes, but they use the V8, not the venerable 6. The BT Cummins. Though I haven't heard any horror stories about them, I also haven't... A lot of what Nissan does is forgettable at this point in time. I remember the XD, when it came out, was a huge deal. There was a massive embargo on when you could release content for it. This was Nissan sort of stepping up, because up until that point, Nissan or Toyota or whoever, the Japanese truck makers hadn't really dived into the heavy-duty realm. You know, the more industrial stuff, that sort of full lineup that means the F-150 can sell everything from a basic single cab all the way up to a King Ranch in any model. You know, Nissan didn't have that until the XD came out, and they were so tight-lipped on that. You couldn't... I remember going to see it at, I think it was test days. Yeah, it was test days, because we could actually drive it, but they told us, you cannot post anything on this vehicle and they gave us a date. And don't ask me the date because this was years ago, and I struggle to remember last week. So, but it was something I was like, that'd be interesting. You know, when I was looking at pickup trucks, I was like, that'd be an interesting thing. And then I was like, ooh, it's a different engine. That sort of scared me off because like I didn't know anything about it. You know, I know, and I, frankly, if there's not an engine kind of rolling across my desk, um, in terms of, you know, me being aware of it or being aware of what it does good and what it does bad, etc. That's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a nothing thing. And again, I'm not shitting on the engine. I'm sure it's fine for what it is. Doug goes, Red Farm uses international harvester tractors. Think of the red tractors we had on our farm when you were here. So is that just slang or vernacular? Like, hey, Doug, you got a red farm? And then the guy down the street using, I don't know, John Deere's has a green farm, or someone using Club Cadet's got a yellow farm or whatever. I mean, I don't, like I said, I don't know. I don't really know much about agricultural stuff, one. And I know even less about rural Pennsylvania farm slang. Or I don't even know if that is slang. Hell, it could be how you're tax defined. I have no idea. John Deere is worth too much in the name just to make it a shorthand. We learn something new every day. Sean goes, so early Ford diesels up to the 7.3 Power Stroke were made by International Harvested. I'm getting... like I said, I know very little about diesel. What I do know is mostly around like the Cummins, because they make it easy, because obviously it's Cummins making the engine, not Mopar. Although I think it would be hilarious to like get some, you know, European from Stellantis over here, and it's like, look, we put a diesel in the big truck. You know, you like diesels, or you used to like diesels. They were clean and efficient and cost less to operate than your gas cars. You guys used to love them until Volkswagen fucked that up. Well, we did it with a truck, not understanding what a modern common rail is capable of, and it's not really built... Well, it is built for efficiency, but... All right. Oops. So I hope you guys can read this. But kind of circling back to our conversation. Actually, you know what I should do? It should be over here. I have that muted. Good. So while we were on the topic of, actually, you know what? I do not want to block that beautiful. Actually, I have to. It's all right. Anyway, not going to waste too much time. But we were talking about what normal people kind of look for in cars, and you may have heard me typing in the background. Let's do this while we're at it. That's not the right socials. Sorry, hold on one second, guys. All right. So we were talking about what normal people kind of look for in, and when they're making a car purchasing decision, etc. So I was just like, and again, you may have heard me typing and stuff of that nature. Kind of putting together sort of a list. Doug may consider this to have too few on it. But what I could come up with was, obviously you want something that's reliable. So regardless of price, you want something that you're going to be able to use, and every 3,000, 5,000, 6,000 miles, whatever your service intervals are, the car's just going to work. Or you have faith that it's going to work, or that there's no horror stories of, I don't know, the rings failing in your engine and it grenading itself. Something like that. Anywho, so you obviously want something reliable. And again, that goes across every type of car. Affordability. I think you could also put in here affordability / value for dollar. One of the things that Lexus built a brand on was its ability to challenge the Germans, specifically Mercedes-Benz, and do it for a purchase price that was 30% less, with a car that was arguably better. So while Lexus didn't have the same panache and brand recognition and, we'll just say, country club extension name recognition as, say, Mercedes-Benz did back in the day, the fact that the car gave you everything that Benz did, and it did it for significantly less, and it wasn't cheaper, it was just less expensive, and it was easier to work on. The engines were more reliable. The LS400 was an absolute game changer. It is an absolute legend that nobody really talks about because, well, it was just a big luxury sedan. It didn't set the world on fire performance-wise. It didn't, it didn't have a big V12. It didn't have it just had a V8 engine that made enough power that worked. So value for dollar is there. Obviously, again, when we're talking affordability, we talked about cost of ownership, in reliability, but it does make a difference. Having an oil change done shouldn't be something you're afraid to do because it's so prohibitively expensive. But there's people out there who go out there and they look at, oh my gosh, this Ferrari, I think the 345s or the Mondial, not Mondials, but you get the idea. Suddenly, Audi RS4s are getting very, very, very affordable. They're not reliable, and they're also expensive to maintain. So let's do it another way. Say you get a car and it's the most economical thing on the world, and you're saving on average $150 a month just in fuel cost. Let's make the math easy. You're saving $100 just in fuel every month. It's $1,200 at the end of the year. But if maintenance eats into 70% of that, and there's another car that's slightly less, it can, like the dollar, making the dollars and cents line up. A car that's less economic but cheaper to maintain and doesn't need maintenance in as frequent intervals, or doesn't need a specialist, right? Like EV maintenance. They're simple. They don't need a ton of mechanical maintenance. Software is their biggest thing. But when you take it in, you need a specialist to work on it. And usually specialists carry a higher per hour labor rate, whether you're at a dealership or not. So, the next three are kind of what I would classify as like the overall driving experience. So is it comfortable? And comfort kind of is comfort and support, right? When you sit in it, does it feel nice? Can you sit in it for a long period of time? Is it something you can sit in and easily kind of look behind you because maybe Junior's acting a fool? Or, is it comfortable for passengers? Is it, you get the car, you get a nice, let's say you get a sports car. I know it's not fitting with our average consumer type of thing. You get a sports car and it's stiff and it's firm, and yeah, it's great for, maybe an hour drive. Maybe. Before the wife starts complaining about how stiff the ride is, how the seats or whatever. One of the great things BMW did with the original 1M, the first of their sub 3 Series compacts. Compact? I guess it's a compact. Technically a 3 Series was midsize. Even though it's the size of a full size. At any rate, was it had incredibly stiff suspension, but it also had incredibly comfortable, supportive seats that didn't translate that suspension harshness into the driver. Tech in a car. A lot of that matters to a lot of people, whether it be an electric vehicle or just the tech of the engine. Oh, it utilizes direct fuel injection with this, blah, 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 to get better gas mileage but keep the same performance. It's to Doug's point, he just mentioned in chat. Or no, never mind. He was talking about labor. Anyway, Doug makes a point on labor at the dealership he works at. He goes, for now anyhow, our labor rate is the same for EV, PHEV, MHEV, or gas. That is interesting. I don't know the first thing about Volvo dealership rates. Would you compare their rates to, say, closer to a Hyundai or one of the pick a German? Anyway, we were talking about tech. Infotainment's a big one. It's the reason why screens have gotten massive over the last few years. People like big screens. They also like buttons. That comes into like the user experience or UI. Why did I type in UI? It should be UX. Hold on. User interface. That's why I typed it. UX. Volkswagen and Honda famously did haptic buttons because they're cheaper to produce, they're sleeker, they make everything look a little more futuristic. Remember, Starship Enterprise, everything was pretty much touchscreen. So it gave that futuristic sort of vibes. But they suck. Especially steering wheel controls being haptic. Because you're waiting for a vibration, but a vibration to tell you you've pressed the button. A button. Jesus Christ, learn how to speak, Chad. So, universally, people didn't like it, but they liked the touchscreens because, well, for the most part, touchscreens have kind of become a status symbol, but a bigger the screen, the easier the information itself is to see. CarPlay is another big thing. I don't know a lot of Android users. I don't know if Android Auto is as ubiquitous with Android. Any Android users in here who have Android Auto can shed some light on whether or not it's as like much of a thing as CarPlay is. Because CarPlay is just fantastic. Same if you know how to use an iPhone, you know how to use CarPlay. It's brilliant. for even hardcore car enthusiasts for me, who's like, I don't need a ton of stuff. CarPlay, wireless specifically, if it has, well, even if it has plugged in hot watt, because you can convert it to wireless. That's a big thing for me. I like that. And good job, GM, getting rid of it. Stuff like having a wireless charger to go along with it. Although, as much as I would love to have a wireless charger, this rock form case, which is great because it's magnetic and can survive. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to. It could survive me throwing it across my living room, crack screen, and later. I don't want to tempt the fate, but theoretically, it could survive it. Better to have and not need than need and not have. All that sort of stuff. Whether you have heated and cooled seats, whether you have stuff like power seats, all these little things that make the active driving easier. Because that's what normal people care about. One of the coolest and simplest, I don't want to call it innovations, is having climate control, radio stations, seat position, steering wheel position, etc., all tied into the key. So whatever key opens the door using the RF, the wireless tech, it's, user 1. That's Mr. Jones. He's 6'2". He likes to see and it just boom, there. And then the wife gets in the car. And generally speaking, they're shorter. And it's her settings. It might be a little warmer. The radio stations be that is just one of those little creature comfort sort of duh moments. It's pretty simple and easy to execute. Dustin Davis over on YouTube goes, 360 cameras are getting better and better. I love a good 360 camera. Backup cameras. We're talking about tech in general. But 360 cameras are fantastic. I remember the first one I had. First vehicle I drove with it was the 2019 Ram 1500 Limited. Limited? Yeah, Limited. And that 360 camera was fantastic. The screen was pretty big. The picture blew every other 360 camera at the time out of the water. Fords couldn't even come close. And it was such a game changer because it gave you that bird's eye view of parking what is a huge vehicle, and it made it super duper easy. Yeah, backup camera's a biggie. It's another one of those ones where it's like, I could live without it. I'd prefer not to. Kind of a deal. Then you have other stuff like all-wheel drive and, the perception of all-wheel drive being better in every condition. All that little sort of stuff that people look for. We look at all-wheel drive as more grip. Yes. Most people look at all-wheel drive like, whew, it's an insurance policy. It isn't, because you could put the wrong tires on, and there ain't an all-wheel drive system on the planet that's going to save you, whether it be wet or cold conditions. But at any rate, all-wheel drive is a big seller. Look at Subaru. They built their entire brand off of being all-wheel drive, except for the BRZ. But as we know, that's a one-off. Doug, answering the question on how much labor rates are at his Volvo dealer. Our rate is $182 per hour in Mechanicsburg, PA. To be fair, if you want a car repaired, Mechanicsburg sounds like a great place to bring it. Just saying. $182 per hour. Eesh. I don't think that's much different from the cheap brands. I would have to do some digging on that. I'll have to take your word for it, though, on tonight's show. Sean goes, I have Android Auto in my Isuzu. Granted, it's a removable tablet, not part of the vehicle. But I have seen cars with both Android Auto and CarPlay. I will say this. I used to have an Android. I used to have a Samsung. I used to have, actually, this Samsung, the S7 Active. One of the best phones I've ever owned. I don't know why I just wiped the dust. What am I doing? And I can confirm that it can survive a 30 mile an hour, we'll just call it sudden impact with asphalt, and subsequently rolling across the pavement into a, I don't want to say ditch, but it was a little bit of a depression on the side of the road. Like it was definitely there because water was drains through there, whatever. But like, not a like, no crack whatsoever. Like, and you can see where did it land? Pretty sure, yeah. Well, all you can see of the evidence of it is like you have some like, I don't know if the camera's gonna like it, but you can see like. But the reason I bring the phone up, and why it doesn't seem to, anyway, is all the cars at the time. And oh, by the way, the car that the phone was sitting on the roof of, that was going 30, 40 miles an hour when this thing let go and, swan dived into the pavement. S60 T6 Volvo. 2019, 2018, somewhere in that neighborhood. Cool car. Let down by an incredibly dim-witted transmission. But that, I don't know if that had it, but I had driven cars with Android Auto, and I remember Android Auto looking incredibly cheap back in the day. And it not being really all that intuitive, and it locking you out of almost everything. It was a pain. I know they've improved, and I know, Andrew, you mentioned you have it and you love it. It's just such a no-brainer piece of technology that every car should have that has an infotainment system with a touchscreen. Full stop. And not for nothing, like, if all these manufacturers came and said, hey, we're going to have one operating system as the base operating system, or two, or whatever, they're going to put in all these cars, amortize the cost of developing that system to, you're spreading it out over a ton of different brands, and have everyone and every single one of these units have CarPlay and Android Auto. Like, it just seems like a no-brainer. I understand there is a large segment of individuals who don't have smartphones. I get that. But it's one of the best things as far as a creature comfort for cars to happen in a very long time. Because it's just so simple. It's smart. If you know how to run an iPhone, you know how to use CarPlay. I'm assuming the Android Auto I had wasn't really the case. But again, that was almost 6, 7, 8 years ago. So, and with the exponential change of technology, I'm sure it's better now. And lastly, as far as the sort of user experience, well, not even user experience, but like the living with a car inside of it, is interior space, room for people and stuff. Obviously a lot of people have kids. They have to carry the kids and their stuff around. So having room in a back seat or even a third row, as Doug mentioned before, which, I mean, like, how many people really care about third rows, and who are you putting back there? I mean, I guess now with car seats and like size of kids being in like a car seat to a booster to a whatever, kids are bigger now sitting in a back seat than they were, when we were growing up, or even 10 years ago for that matter. But what was I gonna say? But like that matters, like having back seats that have a decent amount of room. Your kids have a little more space. They're not on top of each other, annoying each other. Their experience is going to be more pleasant. That's a big deal. Or you have the kids and then you need space to carry around sports equipment or band equipment or whatever. mountain biking, like pick an activity that you need to lug around. Like, space is important. And not for nothing, a lot of people, even if they don't need it, having a more airy cabin, it's why crossovers, that's another reason why average people like crossovers so much. It's not as claustrophobic. Wagons are great. We love wagons. Sports sedans, great. We love them. Like, we love that evolution. We love all that sort of stuff. Like, but average person is like a lot more space. It feels nice. So yeah. And then, like we talked about before, the performance of a vehicle, the ability for it to get out of its own way, for it to not feel like a liability when you're trying to accelerate. I don't know if there's many cars out there today that feel unsafe at 70 miles an hour brand new. Not that I can think. I mean, I'm sure there's some like knockoff off-brand, not knockoff off-brand, but like that like $5,000 Chinese pickup truck. I'm sure that is mildly terrifying at highway speeds. But like, you get the idea. Is like most modern cars have no problem going 100 miles an hour. It's just how long it takes them to get there is kind of a thing. We've driven, what the hell was it? Fuck, it's going to bug the hell out of me. Oh, shoot. I was driving, when I was reviewing cars, forget the SUV, but I had the smallest engine option. Every other option was ticked on this loaner, or this press car, but the engine. And it was so like they could sit here and go wink, wink, nudge, nudge, do a highway run, see how good the miles per gallon is. People will love that because keep in mind, most reviewers get cars from the PR department or from a company run or managed or in contact with the PR department and the marketing department of the OEM. So, but I remember this thing just not being able to get out of its own way. The Equinox has kind of that, but the most hilarious thing, we have a decent set of Firestones on it, tire-wise. They're not crazy high mileage. They're not eco tires, so they're not like some crazy hard compound. They're also not like, 100 tread wear. And depending in the situation, that thing will spin the tires easier than my Mustang did. Or I go really, really slow out of an intersection or a parking lot or something like that. I've no idea why. I could put it in all-wheel drive, but But you get the idea. You want to know, for us, performance is almost the end-all, be-all. It doesn't have to be the fastest thing in the world, but it has to give that push in the back. That's the minimum we require as enthusiasts. When we sit here and talk about handling performance, we're talking about ability to instill confidence to take a corner and stay within the lines. To take a corner and the car's going to stick. The average person might look at handling as more of ride quality, more of stability. Okay, you can give a car like an SUV a really soft, plush ride, but if it's not like adaptive dampers or whatever, it could feel floaty. Think like 80s Cadillac. Early 80s, late 70s Cadillac, right? Like a Cadillac Brougham. Like, floaty. But like when you're going in the corner, you don't want to feel like the G-forces are bringing you. You want it to feel stable. Confident in the fact that it will do the speed limit without, like, that sort of a thing. Obviously you want braking performance, but they're not looking for the shortest braking distance. They just want that to be within a reasonable threshold. And to have a pedal that isn't mush. You know, pretty much. I mean, think about it this way, right? We're in 2025, so so basically, they're kids born in 2008. Fuck. Jesus Christ. They're kids born in 2008 who are learning to drive, who have no concept of pumping the brakes, nor should they, because pretty much every car they're going to drive, there are exceptions, like there are to everything, but very, very, very few exceptions. Few people are, they're taught just slam on the brake and let the computer figure it out. So, and so just people want to be comfortable. They want to have confidence in the car that it's going to be able to just go around bends, get them out of an intersection, out of a parking lot, and stop within a reasonable distance. And then this also kind of comes into the tech side of things too. Some people like lane keep assist, other people don't. Some people like the passive self-driving. I don't even like calling that. Other people's could give a shit. Guilty. So, Sean goes, what they should do is basically just install effectively a tablet in the dash that can run both systems, depending on your phone, and also have the display removable. What are we going back to the early 2000s when you took the faceplate off your head unit to make sure it didn't get stolen, or you had the removable head units? I don't know if going fully removable, and not for nothing, I think there's an operating system. Yeah, to any normal person, it makes sense. Like, why don't they just have... I have a tablet at home that's an iPad. Poop. Put that in, give it provisions to run HVAC, have it programmed to run like the regular radio or satellite radio or etc. Have it for the digital outs that's required for the audio system to go into an amplifier and everything. But I also know on the flip side, when it comes to the car, you want an extra layer of security. So having a universal operating system might not be the best idea, but having like 2 or 3 over how many manufacturers, right? Just amortize the cost, man. Like, as long as it doesn't look like ass. More money is wasted on those bespoke, brand-specific UIs or GUIs, graphical user interface for all of our non-ridiculous nerds out there. Something Xerox pioneered, by the way, that Microsoft stole from them. My dad actually used to work for Xerox before he worked for the power company. But so much money, time is just wasted in that. I would love to conduct some sort of poll. I don't know. Getting the right people in front of the poll, or the poll in front of the right people, would be the tricky bit. But everybody who owns a car that is CarPlay capable, or Android Auto capable, how many of them use the stock interface? The only reason I'm using the stock interface in the Equinox right now is that for whatever reason CarPlay isn't working. Which I have to get looked at, but I have a multitude of other stuff going on at the moment. But to figure out what percentage of people are actually using the stock interface and why. And if, someone in my case, if it's a technical issue, would you use CarPlay? And the answer is yes. So, I'd be curious to know that. I'd also be curious to know what tech company paid GM. Because I got to imagine they outsourced making of the programming of the operating system of their infotainment systems to a third party. And there had to have been something going on with that, right? Like, there had to have been something. Because why would you get rid of something that people universally love, that costs next to nothing to include? And, like, I don't want to hear this nonsense that our system's better. Nobody cares. They could literally come out with the absolute best UI in a infotainment system that has ever or will ever exist, and still people will choose CarPlay because it's familiar. You know, they don't have to learn something new. So, Sean is also talking about the Slate truck. I mean, yeah, like the Slate truck, I think, is in a completely different. Yeah, Sean goes, my taxes paid for the road. I'm going to use the whole road, officer. See how well that works out. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, the Slate, as we've talked about, is sort of an outlier. It's a trend disruptor, a status quo interrupter. In the fact of that it's not revolutionary technology technology. It's not revolutionary thought, considering this is how, like, the car originally was built. It's like, oh, sir, you come to the Cadillac dealer. Here is your chassis. Oh, you would like a body and controls on that car. Oh, foolish. Go down the street to the coach builder. And then you tell them what you want in your car, right? Slate is just a one coach builder version of this. And like we said, I love the customization of it. And individuals love the customization of it. You know, that notion that you're going to be able to have everything you want and nothing you don't. Or the fact that if you can't necessarily afford something at this moment in time, it's not an enormous endeavor to do it at a later date. You know, and all about that. You don't make a $20,000 base car without it, being pretty barren, but it's not a bad thing. And 2, keeping costs down is huge, so why not use an existing tablet? Maybe not a tablet, but you get the idea. And to that notion, I know the ones that won't have a quote-unquote infotainment screen, you'll be able to just plop your phone in a holster or something. And via Bluetooth, it'll run everything. Which is another cool thing, because, like, most phones now are about the same size as a small infotainment screen. So, and again, it's your phone. You know how to work it. You know where everything is. You put the shortcuts where you wanted the shortcuts. So, let's see here. Doug goes, Volvos use Google practically universal, other than Apple folks. And yeah, it matters. CarPlay is important. Again, it's one of those things. It's, you know, Steve Jobs convinced us that having a smartphone was something the average person needed in an era of flip phones and Blackberries, right? Like, people who had smartphones back in the day, they needed them, or convinced themselves they needed them, from the sense of they can provide the emails, they can do scheduling. It's like having a personal assistant, sort of. And then Apple comes along and says, nah, it's not like that. We make all this other stuff. We're just going to cram it into the phone. So it's going to be your phone. It's going to be an iPod. It's going to be a mini computer that you can go on the internet with. And, like, the real internet. I don't know if you guys remember back in the day what mobile sites looked like on not Apples and touchscreen phones. They were hilarious. So my generation was trained to think that stuff's important. And a lot of people my age have kids who are of a certain age to have a phone. I'm not saying you give kids phones at ridiculously young ages. And all those kids know are smartphones, which is insane to me because you're giving a kid. At any rate, so we're all trained. Everybody younger than us has been trained. That having an iPhone or an Android or a Samsung or whatever is the norm and is important. And now that your car can mimic that, the importance sort of transfers over to that. But before we wrap it up here, chat, tell me. You see the list on the screen. We went over the list. What did I miss? And it's okay if we don't cover everything. I think we have a good base. And it's not something we're going to go in depth next week. It's something I just sort of want to present and then move on. Because Tony's got a lot of cool stuff. His 3 cars. All of them. I don't want to spoil it, but all of them are, in one way, shape, or form, a form of enthusiasm. Enthusiast cars. There's some pretty interesting stories with him. And he's just generally an interesting dude. So, yeah. If there's one major thing that I forgot, I'm sure there's something on the tip of Doug's mind that he's been itching to have an opportunity to tell me. Same thing with Sean, for that matter. Yeah, that's another thing. To Andrew's point, tech is a huge thing in cars now. I know Greg is way more into it than I am, but it is a rather large thing for him when he's looking at a car. Is the tech involved? And he nerds out about it, and he geeks out about it, and he likes it. He likes kind of the minutia and stuff of it. For me, it's a tool. It's a very convenient tool, and there's certain things I like in that, or I would like for that tool to have. But, Sean goes, I like knobs and buttons. I really love the chunky mechanical switches in the Isuzu. I think there's a lot of people who, not a lot of people, I think the overwhelming and vast majority of consumers agree with you. Especially in a vehicle like that. Especially in not necessarily your traditional crossover, but a body-on-frame SUV. Or a truck. Something that has guts. Something that you might attach a snowplow to. Something that you're not afraid to take out in inclement weather. Something that you might tow something with. Something that you might haul stuff with. Something that you just flat out bought for the off-road performance, right? You don't want a dainty touchscreen, or you don't want even a dainty small little button to put it in four-wheel drive. You don't want, let alone the consequences of accidentally knocking it into 4 high or 4 low when you want to be in 4 high, or all that other sort of stuff. Dustin goes, okay, so we might want to add to driveline, might be a thing. But Dustin makes a great point. He would have probably become best friends with Steve based solely on that point alone. But he goes, I prefer a traditional automatic to a CVT. I think a lot of people do. I think CVTs have their place. I think CVTs have their benefits. They also have their downsides. If they're not done exactly right, they tend to be pretty unreliable. I personally can't drive it without my brain of 23-ish years driving a manual transmission, of it sounding like someone is mercilessly riding a clutch pedal. That audible noise, like as you're accelerating, is just like, it's that proverbial nails on the chalkboard kind of a thing. So, that sort of thing. But on the flip side, like, they do have their places. If they can be worked out, they work really well for, like, say, hybrids. Because you can constantly manipulate the RPM of the engine based on gearing without... So you could... I mean, the possibilities are endless. I mean, we've talked about this. We've mentioned this. Williams F1 back in the 90s, I think it was. It might have been the late 80s, but I'm pretty sure it was the 90s. Back when Williams F1 was like the team. They were the ones messing around with traction control, adaptive suspensions, all of it. They were at the cutting edge of technology in Formula One back in the day. Not so much now, but they actually tested a CVT transmission F1 car. And it was like 3 or 4 seconds faster than the exact same car, but with a traditional... I don't know if they were using... I know they were using sequentials. I don't know if it was like a dual clutch at this point, or the Ferrari. I know Ferrari was the first to use the semi-automatic paddle shift transmission that has become ubiquitous in motorsport now. But the problem with it wasn't the transmission. Turns out, when you have an F1 engine, which is already highly strung at peak power, always, it makes it very fast. Also lends to the engine going boom. So that was, and then, as if that wasn't enough, the FAA banned it, the tech. So who knows? There's an alternate universe where the FAA doesn't ban that tech. They figure out how to make it work, and we have like redonkulously overdeveloped, overbuilt engines in performance, and CVTs are better than dual clutches. Which, thank God, we live in this timeline. Where are we? David, most cars sold today are solid cars. I would agree with that. Most important thing to do is to get your credit union, get a prepaid loan amount. This will tell you what your credit rate, where your credit rate will get you. Yeah, exactly. I mean, verbatim, every car I've gone after, I've gotten pre-approved. So, number one, you know what you can afford. Number two, it makes the purchasing process so much easier because, in my case, with both cars, they just sent me a check, and I filled out the amount. And as long as it didn't exceed their approval number, we were good. And it made it so much faster than sitting there waiting for approval, blah, blah, blah. But from a sound, yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, David. Good, excellent point. Yeah, and then to your point, credit unions, if you have an opportunity to get in with one, I know my credit union, when it came to interest on my auto loans, was ridiculous. I think on the silver Mustang, because I bought it in 2019 and I have pretty good credit, if I went through because I always do my due diligence. If I went through the finance department at the Ford dealer, it was going to be like 7%. And to the credit union, it was like 3.5%. It was literally half. Which, compound interest is a bitch. And it ends up saving you a ton of money. So, just a word to the wise. Sean, when you turn the headlights on in the Isuzu, it sounds like you just armed a weapons system. I mean, that's cool. There's also something to be said for just turning lights on. But to each their own. That's what I'm saying. Like, we are enthusiasts. We like those clunky mechanical things, right? Like, you like when you put a car into four-wheel drive, not for it to be a button and you just sort of hear a hum. You like, a lot of people like that actual lever where it's clunk. And you are actually, you have that physical affirmation that the car is in the mode that you want it to be, as opposed to a little display saying, you are now in four-wheel drive. You are in four low. You are in four high. You actually physically know. Andrew, Andrew agrees with Sean. I grew up on cars with pushing the buttons, cars, because it's so much fun. Yeah, kids do love that. And then David goes saying no, no, no to everything in the credit office. I mean, yeah, you're going to get your best rate from probably either whether you're a member with a credit union, whether, you know, things like USAA that are multifaceted. I think they work with Navy Federal Credit Union or something like that. But your bank, if you have been with a bank for a long period of time, will almost always have a better rate than what a finance department will get you. And it all depends on your credit. You know, on the flip side, you might not get a great rate from a finance department, but they might be the only ones willing to give you a loan. And depending on your situation, that may be a necessary evil. Dustin goes on CVTs. It's horrible. They are good for low RPMs and low loads. They have proven to last a long time. Yeah, because of the nature of it, I don't... Oh. Might be having some internet issues. Hey, if you could and you said, just let me know how the connection's working, because on my end it looked like... Oh, no. Came back. Anyway, what were we talking about? CVTs. Just due to the nature of it and the fact that it's basically two cones and two belts, determining a output ratio or an input to output ratio. That lends itself to wear. That lends itself to slipping. It lends itself to not being the most heavy duty. You know, you look at a lot of performance cars. They don't have timing belts. They have timing chains. And you look at really, really high performance engines. They don't have timing chains. They have timing gears. You know, they don't have to run everything. So, I think, honestly, with CVTs, I think they have their place with hybrids. And I'm not talking about your high performance hybrids. I'm talking about just, you know, a Prius, a Honda Insight, an Accord hybrid. You know, a hybrid that's just basically like, okay, this thing has the normalcy of a gas engine with the efficiency of an electric car. Well, not the efficiency, but you get the idea. You know, it has its place there. Because again, because you can infinitely variable that, you can have a mode where 80% or 90% is going to power, 10% is going to charge. You can have it, you know, in a manner of speaking, engine brake slowly, so it's not like a downshift where it's like you can have it slow down over time where it's a little bit better for regeneration. There's so many, just because of the nature, and generally speaking with hybrids, you're not lugging around a massive trailer or a ton of stuff, or in those what's the word I'm looking for? In those scenarios. That wasn't the word I was looking for, but I'm not going to waste time trying to figure it out. The noise. Yeah. Anyone who's driven a CVT with a manual, or having driven a manual as a daily driver, it's just like, I can't do it. And Doug, who works at a dealer, goes, my advice is always to find what your bank will offer and let the dealer beat it. I mean, absolutely. It's like everything else in life. Put two people bidding for your business against each other, and chances are you're going to win. Now, they might come out with the exact same thing. They might come out, but, you know, you shop around, right? Any intelligent person shops around for a car. You should shop around for a loan and a rate the same way. I'm in a slightly different situation because, like, basically, I get the pre-approval from the credit union, and I go in. They're like, would you like to finance with us? I go, can you beat this percent? And they go, not even if you have beyond perfect credit. So, I know a loan officer can modify terms, but there's a clock spring sensor. That's something I did not know. Clock spring? What? I just learned something. Andrew goes, I just learned something with the P2 Volvos with the clock spring sensor. Didn't even know cars had spring sensors for the clock. Knew something every day. Doug goes, when I sold Fords, a customer saying yes was by no means a sale. Got to get them approved. At Volvo, it's once or twice a year that someone is declined, but I don't mark my rates up. I don't have a finance office. I do get talked to about low warranty sales, though. I don't care. I sell the most cars, and they can't fire me. Oh, you're not selling a bunch of extended warranties and stuff like that. Yeah, like, so here's the thing. Like, if you're moving units, you're moving units. Now, obviously, I'm going to guess here that the profit margin in warranties is a lot more, and it's easy money. And I'm pretty sure you have, like, I don't know what your dealership calls them, but, like, when I was in sales, they would call them, like, spiffs. You know, or if you sold this thing, like, I know my buddy who works for Nissan, if they sell the acid etching on the window for the security or whatever it is, doesn't matter the car, doesn't matter the purchase price, doesn't matter whatever, the salesman gets $50. So, I'll say this, and I think it's a good spot to wrap up. When you're buying a car, now everybody watching right now, we're different animals. You know, excuse me. When I bought the first Mustang, it took me 6 months. Because I knew what I wanted, and I knew the prices were good. I just needed to wait. Thank God I bought it when I did, because, well, we all know what happened after 2019. Although, early on in that, car prices were pretty low. At any rate. And then when I had to buy the second Mustang, that one took me 3 months. Kind of pissed at how it turned out, but live and learn. You know, the only thing I could have done differently was somehow figure out a way to get a leak down test done at the dealership, but it wasn't something I was thinking of. That's partly my fault, partly, you know, the frequency at which the Gen 3 Coyotes are having ring failure is not at such an incredible percentage that it's something to be on the lookout for, not necessarily something you should be worried about. And so on. But every part of the process, you should shop for. And seek people who know. You know, we have the idea of Doug, who can help people out. But, like, you know, you shop around for the best financing, shopping around for the best, like, what's the word, like, you know, best insurance, or, you know, best, you know, bang for buck. You know, I know in my particular area, if I go to a Ford dealership and look at a used Mustang, it's going to cost me X, just in the purchase price, not fees, not counting fees or anything like that, because you got to pay tax, title, and registration, no matter what. But I also know if I go across the border into PA, the exact same Mustang with the exact same mileage, or there, give or take, it's usually like $1,000 or $2,000, if not more, cheaper. Same car, same condition. Just cars in PA generally are less expensive than they are here in New Jersey. You know, and all it costs is a hour and a half ride. Ooh. And I've noticed PA dealers, on average, are more willing to haggle than the dealers I've dealt with in New Jersey. And then just to put a wrap on Andrew's comment about, to which Doug confirmed the Volvo clock spring sensors are a thing. P2 Volvos that don't have DSTC with the clock spring steering wheel sensor with our DSTC. Cars Volvo software, the Volvo 2, the certified Volvo shop, the P2 Volvo's clock spring. It doesn't. That is redonkulously complicated and like, oh boy, howdy.